The rain fell like a judgment I couldn't escape, each drop hitting the cardboard shelter I'd built behind the old theater on Fifth Street. 3 months ago, I'd had an apartment, a job at the bookstore, and enough money to buy groceries without counting pennies. Now I had a sleeping bag that smelled like mildew, 2 changes of clothes in a plastic garbage bag, and a can of soup I'd been saving for 2 days because my stomach had finally stopped pretending it wasn't empty. I was 24 years old, and I'd become invisible. People walked past me on the sidewalk like I was a ghost, their eyes sliding away from my unwashed hair and the dirt under my fingernails. I'd learned that poverty had a smell, a particular mix of sweat and desperation that marked you as someone to avoid. The soup can felt heavy in my hands as I worked the manual opener around its edge. Chicken noodle, the cheap kind that was more broth than substance, but it was warm and it was mine. I'd bought it 3 weeks ago, back when I still had $17 to my name. Now I had nothing except this last meal and the crushing weight of failure pressing down on my chest like a physical thing. That's when I heard the crying. A child's sob, high and frightened, coming from the alley entrance where the streetlight cast shadows that looked like reaching hands. I should have ignored it, should have eaten my soup and minded my business because kindness was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. But something in that sound bypassed my survival instincts and went straight to the part of me that still remembered being human. The boy couldn't have been more than 6 years old, his dark hair plastered to his head by the rain, and his clothes expensive enough that I knew immediately he didn't belong in this part of town. He stood there shaking, his small hands wrapped around his middle like he could hold himself together through sheer will. When he saw me, his eyes went wide with the kind of fear that suggested he'd been taught to avoid people like me. "I'm lost," he whispered, his voice breaking on the words. "I can't find my father." The smart thing would have been to call the police, to let someone official handle a lost child who was clearly for money, but I'd learned that people like me calling the police usually ended with questions about why we were where we were, with suspicious looks and accusations that had nothing to do with helping anyone. Instead, I held out my soup can, still warm in my hands. "Are you hungry?" The boy hesitated, probably remembering warnings about strangers and street people and all the dangers his parents had told him about. But hunger and fear won out over caution. He nodded, moving closer with careful steps like he was approaching a wild animal. I found a relatively clean piece of cardboard and gestured for him to sit beside me, out of the worst of the rain. The theater's overhang provided some shelter, and I positioned myself so that my body blocked the wind from hitting him directly. He was shivering hard enough that his teeth chattered, and up close I could see that his expensive jacket was torn at the shoulder. We shared the soup in silence, passing the can back and forth. I let him have most of it, watching as color slowly returned to his pale cheeks. He ate like someone who wasn't used to being hungry, with a delicacy that suggested regular meals and table manners, and a life so far removed from mine that we might as well have been from different planets. "What's your name?" I asked when the can was empty. The boy looked at me with eyes that were too old for his face, like he'd seen things that children shouldn't see. His answer came out barely above a whisper, and something about the careful way he said it made me think he'd been taught not to give his name to strangers. But here in the rain, with soup warming his belly and my threadbare blanket wrapped around his shoulders, we weren't strangers anymore. We were two people who'd found each other in the darkness. "My name is Thomas," he said, and then after a pause, like he was making a decision that might have consequences, "Thomas Castellano." The last name meant nothing to me, but the way he said it suggested it should have. Before I could respond, the sound of car engines filled the alley, multiple vehicles moving with purpose and coordination. Black SUVs materialized out of the rain like sharks emerging from dark water, their headlights turning the narrow space into something resembling a stage. Men in dark suits poured out of the vehicles, and I instinctively pulled Thomas closer, my body going into a protective crouch that was pure instinct. A single man emerged from the center vehicle, and even in the rain and shadows, he commanded attention in a way that made my breath catch. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with the kind of build that suggested discipline and violence in equal measure. His suit probably cost more than I'd made in a year at my old job, and he wore it like armor, but it was his face that stopped my heart. Sharp features that could have been carved from stone. Dark hair swept back from a face that was beautiful in the way dangerous things often are. And his eyes, pale gray, cold as winter ice, scanning the alley with the kind of focus that missed nothing. When those eyes found Thomas, something flickered in them. Relief, fear, fury, all mixed together in an expression too complex to name. Then his gaze shifted to me, taking in my filthy clothes, my makeshift shelter, the empty soup can still clutched in my hand. The assessment was thorough and damning, and I felt shame burn through me like acid. "Thomas," the man said, his voice carrying an accent I couldn't place. Italian, maybe, wrapped around words that held absolute authority. "Come here." But the boy didn't move. Instead, his small hand gripped my arm with surprising strength, and when he spoke, his voice was stronger than before. "She helped me, Papa. She shared her food with me when I was scared. Papa." The word registered slowly, and I looked between the man in the expensive suit and the child holding my arm, seeing the resemblance now. The same dark hair, the same set to the jaw, the same eyes that could go from warm to cold in a heartbeat. This man was Thomas's father, which meant he was someone important, someone with resources and power and the kind of influence that came with motorcades and security details. Someone so far above my station that we existed in different universes. "Let the boy go," the man said, but his voice had softened slightly. He directed the words at me, and I realized with a start that he thought I was a threat, that he'd found his son in the company of a homeless woman and assumed the worst. I released Thomas immediately, my hands going up in a gesture of surrender. I wasn't hurting him. He was lost and scared, and I just gave him some soup. The man moved closer, and I caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something darker. Rain and leather and barely restrained violence. His security detail flanked him, their hands resting on concealed weapons, and I understood with sudden clarity that I was in a position where one wrong move could end very badly for me. Thomas scrambled forward, positioning himself between me and his father in a gesture that was both brave and foolish. "She's my friend, Papa. She protected me." The man knelt down, bringing himself to his son's eye level. His large hands cupped the boy's face with surprising gentleness, checking for injuries with the kind of thoroughness that suggested this wasn't the first time he'd had to do this. "Are you hurt? Did anyone touch you?" "No, Papa. I got separated from Roberto at the market, and I ran, and then I was lost, and she found me." Those pale gray eyes lifted to mine again, and this time the assessment was different. Still cautious, still calculating, but with something else underneath. Curiosity, maybe, or confusion about why someone with nothing would share what little they had. "What's your name?" The question was direct, commanding. Not really a request, but an order disguised as politeness. I thought about lying, about giving him a fake name and disappearing into the city's anonymous masses as soon as he left. But Thomas was watching me with those two old eyes, and something about the moment felt like it mattered in ways I couldn't predict. "Katherine," I said, and then, because some stubborn part of me refused to be ashamed, "Katherine Reed." "When did you eat last?" The question caught me off guard. Not what I expected from a man who probably thought I was a threat to his child. I gestured to the empty soup can. "That was going to be my dinner." "You gave your last meal to my son." It wasn't really a question, more like a statement that he was trying to reconcile with whatever assumptions he'd made about people like me. I shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention and the way his security detail was still watching me, like I might produce a weapon from my filthy clothes. He was hungry and scared. That matters more than me being uncomfortable for one more night. The man stood, his expression unreadable, but something had shifted in the way he looked at me, like I'd answered a question he hadn't known he was asking. Behind him, one of the security guards spoke in rapid Italian, words I didn't understand, but that sounded like warnings or advice. The man responded in the same language, his tone brooking no argument. When he turned back to me, his voice carried a weight that suggested this wasn't a casual offer. "Come with us." I must have looked as shocked as I felt because his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Please. I owe you a debt for protecting my son, and I always pay my debts. You don't owe me anything." I did what anyone would do. Most people wouldn't have. His pale eyes held mine with uncomfortable intensity. Most people would have walked past a crying child or called authorities, or worse. You shared your last meal. That matters. Thomas tugged on his father's sleeve, speaking in urgent whispers that I couldn't quite hear. Whatever he said made the man's expression shift again, something almost like pain crossing those sharp features before being carefully controlled. The decision seemed to settle over him like a weight. "You're coming with us, Miss Reed." Not a request this time, but a statement of fact delivered with the kind of authority that suggested arguing would be pointless. "You'll have a hot meal, clean clothes, and a place to sleep tonight. Tomorrow we'll discuss more permanent arrangements." Permanent arrangements. The phrase should have terrified me, should have sent me running into the rain and the familiar misery of street life. But my body betrayed me, swaying slightly as exhaustion and hunger and 3 months of barely surviving caught up with me all at once. The man moved faster than someone his size should have been able to, his hand catching my elbow before I could fall. His touch was surprisingly gentle, and up close I could see that his eyes weren't just gray, but had flecks of blue in them like storm clouds breaking over water. "When was the last time you slept?" "I don't remember." The admission came out as barely a whisper. "Maybe 3 days ago." Really slept, I mean. Not just dozed and woke up every time someone walked past. His jaw tightened, that muscle jumping like he was processing information he didn't like. He gestured to one of the security guards, speaking in crisp Italian that got immediate results. Within seconds, someone had draped an expensive coat over my shoulders, and another guard was carefully gathering my few possessions from the cardboard shelter. I wanted to protest, wanted to maintain some dignity by refusing charity, but the coat was warm and smelled clean, and I was so tired that standing required conscious effort. The drive to wherever we were going passed in a blur of exhaustion and disbelief. I sat in the back of one of the SUVs, with Thomas pressed against my side, his small hand still gripping my arm like I might disappear if he let go. His father sat across from us, those pale eyes watching me with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. The city transformed as we drove, moving from the rundown neighborhoods I'd come to know too well into areas where wealth wasn't just visible, but aggressively displayed. Clean streets, manicured lawns, buildings that gleamed like they'd never known dirt or decay. We stopped at a building that looked like something from a magazine, all glass and steel reaching toward the sky with the kind of aggressive modernity that announced its own importance. The penthouse, naturally. Because, of course, a man who traveled with a security detail and wore suits that cost thousands lived in a penthouse. The elevator ride felt like ascending into another world, and when the doors opened directly into the apartment, I stopped breathing. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the city that made it look small and manageable, like a toy model rather than the harsh reality I'd been surviving in. The furniture was modern and expensive, each piece carefully selected to suggest wealth without ostentation. Original artwork adorned walls that were painted in shades that probably had pretentious names like Midnight Pearl or Whispered Dove. And it was warm, genuinely, beautifully. Impossibly warm. I hadn't been truly warm in 3 months, and the heated air hit me like a physical embrace. My knees went weak again, and this time, when I swayed, the man was there, his hand steadying me with surprising gentleness. Careful, his voice was closer now, and I could hear something underneath the authority. Concern, maybe? Or just the automatic courtesy of someone used to taking care of broken things. You're safe here. Safe. What a strange concept. I'd forgotten what safe felt like. A woman appeared from somewhere in the apartment, older, with kind eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone used to dealing with emergencies. She took in my appearance without judgment, just professional assessment. "This is Helen," the man said. "She'll help you get cleaned up and find something to wear. Thomas, go with Margaret. Bath and bed." "But Papa?" The boy's protest was cut short by a look from his father. Not mean, but firm. "We've discussed this. Katherine needs rest, and so do you. We'll talk in the morning." Thomas hugged me quickly before allowing himself to be led away by another woman who appeared from somewhere in the apartment's depths. The boy looked back once, his expression worried, and I managed a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. Helen guided me through corridors that seemed to go on forever, past rooms that were each larger than the entire apartment I'd lost 3 months ago. The bathroom she led me to was bigger than some people's bedrooms, all marble and chrome and fixtures that probably cost more than a car. "I'll leave clothes." Outside the door, Helen said, her voice kind but professional. "Take as long as you need. There are fresh towels in the cabinet, and everything in the shower is new. When you're ready, there will be food waiting." She left before I could formulate a response, and I stood in that beautiful bathroom feeling like an imposter in someone else's life. The mirror showed me what I'd become, and I almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. Hollow cheeks, dark circles under eyes that looked too large for my face, hair that was more matte than anything resembling styled. I looked like a ghost, like something that had died but hadn't figured out how to stop moving yet. The shower was an exercise in revelation and shame. The water ran brown at first, washing away 3 months of accumulated grime and defeat. I scrubbed my skin until it was pink and raw, trying to wash away the feeling that I didn't belong here, that at any moment someone would realize the mistake and send me back to the streets. The clothes Helen left were simple but expensive, soft cotton that felt like heaven against my clean skin. They fit well enough, though they hung loose on my frame in ways that emphasized how much weight I'd lost. When I emerged from the bathroom, steam billowing around me like I was being born from clouds, Helen was waiting with the kind of patience that suggested nothing I did could surprise her. The kitchen was another revelation, all stainless steel and granite surfaces that gleamed under carefully positioned lighting. Helen had prepared soup, real soup with vegetables and chicken and noodles that were actually visible. She'd also set out fresh bread, still warm, and a glass of water that tasted clean in ways I'd forgotten water could taste. "Eat slowly," Helen advised, watching me with those kind, experienced eyes. "Your stomach won't handle too much at once after how you've been living." She was right. Even though every instinct screamed at me to devour everything in sight, I forced myself to eat small bites, to let my body adjust to the sudden abundance. The man, Thomas's father, entered the kitchen as I was finishing. He'd changed from his expensive suit into dark slacks and a black sweater that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than less. Without the formal armor of his business attire, I could see the muscles that suggested he didn't just command violence, but could deliver it personally if necessary. "May I sit?" The question surprised me. This was his home, his kitchen, his universe. He didn't need permission for anything, but something about the way he asked suggested he understood power dynamics, understood that I was vulnerable here, and didn't want to make that worse. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He settled into the chair across from me with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in his own body. Up close, I could see details I'd missed before. A small scar above his left eyebrow, the calluses on his hands that suggested he didn't just delegate violence but participated in it, the way his eyes tracked movement with the kind of focus that came from surviving situations where a split second could mean the difference between life and death. "My name is Vincent Castellano," he said, "and I want to thank you properly for protecting my son." The name meant nothing to me, but the way he said it suggested it should have. I could see him registering my lack of recognition, could almost see him recalculating whatever assumptions he'd made about me. "You don't know who I am. Should I?" Something that might have been amusement flickered in his pale eyes. Most people in this city know the Castellano name, but then, most people haven't been living on the streets for months, focused solely on survival. The statement wasn't cruel, just observational. He pulled out his phone, tapping at the screen with efficient movements. "I'm transferring money to an account in your name. Enough to get you back on your feet. First and last month's rent on an apartment. Clothes, food, whatever you need to start rebuilding." I stared at him, trying to process words that sounded like they were coming from very far away. "You don't have to do that." "I do." His voice was firm, allowing no argument. "You gave my son your last meal, Miss Reed. That kind of selflessness deserves to be rewarded, especially in a world where most people would have walked past a scared child without a second thought. But there's more, isn't there?" The question came out before I could stop it. Some survival instinct that had kept me alive on the streets was screaming that this was too good, too easy, that men like Vincent Castellano didn't just hand out money without expecting something in return. His expression shifted, something like respect crossing those sharp features. "You're right to be suspicious. In my experience, people who expect nothing usually find themselves disappointed by nothing." He leaned back in his chair, his pale eyes studying me with uncomfortable intensity. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Reed, one that could change your life permanently, if you're willing to take a risk." I waited, every muscle in my body tense with the certainty that whatever he was about to offer would come with strings attached. "Thomas needs someone," Vincent said quietly. "His mother died 2 years ago, and since then he's had nannies, tutors, bodyguards, everyone except someone who genuinely cares about his well-being rather than their paycheck." My chest tightened with understanding. "You want me to be his nanny. I want you to be part of our lives." Vincent's voice was careful, like he was negotiating something delicate. "Thomas connected with you in minutes, Miss Reed. He trusted you enough to accept food from a stranger, to let you protect him, to defend you to me. That kind of instinct is rare, and I've learned to trust my son's judgment about people." He leaned forward, his intensity almost overwhelming. "I'm offering you a position in my household, not as a servant, but as family." The word hung between us like something fragile and dangerous. Family. I'd lost mine slowly over the years. My parents dead. My sister disappeared into her own life. My friends evaporating when I couldn't keep up with rent and social obligations. The idea that I could suddenly have family again, especially one as complicated as this, felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and being asked to jump. What exactly would this position entail? The question came out steadier than I felt. Vincent's expression remained carefully neutral. "You would live here, in the guest suite. Your primary responsibility would be Thomas, not just watching him but being present in his life, helping with homework, attending school events, being someone he can trust and talk to. You'd have access to everything you need: food, clothes, medical care, education if you want to continue studying. In return, I ask for your loyalty and your discretion." Discretion. The word carried weight, suggested secrets that would need to be kept. I thought about the security detail, the expensive penthouse, the way people seemed to react to the Castellano name. Vincent was clearly someone important, someone whose business dealings probably weren't entirely legal, someone whose world operated by rules I didn't understand, and he was offering me a place in that world. "You're hesitating," Vincent observed, his voice giving nothing away. "That's wise. Most people would have accepted immediately without thinking about the implications. But you're wondering what kind of man makes an offer like this to a stranger, what my real motivations are, whether this is some kind of trap." He stood, moving to the window that offered views of the glittering city below. "I run a family business, Miss Reed. Import, export, construction, real estate, various interests that require careful management and sometimes aggressive protection. Some of what we do exists in gray areas that law enforcement finds troubling. I won't lie to you about that. You're telling me you're a criminal. I'm telling you that I operate in a world where the lines between legal and illegal are more flexible than most people realize." Vincent turned back to me, his pale eyes reflecting the city lights. "But I'm also a father who loves his son and wants him to grow up knowing kindness and compassion, not just power and fear. You showed Thomas more genuine care in 15 minutes than most people have shown him in 2 years. That matters more to me than any business deal I could ever negotiate." The confession was unexpected, vulnerability from a man who probably showed weakness to no one. I studied his face, looking for deception or manipulation, but saw only exhaustion and a grief that he carried like a physical weight. What happened to his mother? The question was too personal, too intrusive, but Vincent didn't flinch. "She was killed." His voice was flat, emotionless in the way that suggested enormous feeling, carefully controlled. 2 years ago, targeted because someone wanted to hurt me. Thomas was there when it happened. He saw everything. My heart broke for the little boy who'd shared soup with me in the rain, who'd been brave enough to defend me to his father. No wonder his eyes looked too old for his face. He'd seen darkness that no child should ever witness. "I can't promise to fix that." The words came out softer than I intended. "That kind of trauma, it doesn't just go away because someone is kind to him." "I know." Vincent moved back to the table, his hands flat against the marble surface. "But maybe you can show him that not everyone leaves. That sometimes people stay, even when things are difficult. That kindness isn't weakness, but strength." The offer was tempting in ways I couldn't fully articulate. Warmth, safety, purpose, all the things I'd been surviving without for 3 months. But accepting meant entering a world I didn't understand. Binding myself to a man whose business dealings probably involved violence and moral ambiguity I wasn't sure I could navigate. And yet, when I thought about walking away, about going back to the streets or accepting just the money and trying to rebuild alone, something in my chest tightened with protest. Thomas's face kept appearing in my mind, those two old eyes, the way he'd gripped my arm like I was the only solid thing in a world that had proven unreliable. Maybe one damaged person could help another damaged person find their way back to something resembling whole. "I'll accept on 3 conditions," I heard myself say, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Vincent's eyebrow rose slightly, the first crack in his carefully controlled expression. "Go on. First, I need to understand what I'm getting into. Not every detail, I understand operational security, but enough to know what kind of danger I'm walking into and what rules I need to follow." His nod was immediate, almost approving. "Fair. Second, if I decide this isn't working, if I feel like I'm in over my head or that I'm not actually helping Thomas, I can leave. No retaliation, no consequences beyond losing this opportunity." That earned me a longer look, Vincent's pale eyes studying my face like he was reading a language only he understood. "Agreed. Though I think you're underestimating your own resilience, Miss Reed. Anyone who survived 3 months on the streets has more strength than most people develop in a lifetime. And third, I looked him straight in the eye, refusing to blink or look away, despite every instinct screaming that challenging a man like Vincent Castellano was dangerous. You have to be honest with me about Thomas, his triggers, his fears, what helps and what makes things worse. I can't help him if I'm walking blind into situations that could hurt him. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his expression shifting through emotions too complex to name. When he spoke, his voice was rough with something that might have been respect or relief, or both. You have yourself a deal, Katherine Reed. He extended his hand, and when I took it, his grip was firm but not crushing, warm despite the coldness in his eyes. Tomorrow, I'll introduce you properly to the household staff and explain our daily routines. Tonight, you rest. Helen will show you to your room. The guest suite was larger than any apartment I'd ever lived in, with a bed that felt like sleeping on clouds and windows that offered views of the city I'd been surviving in from a perspective I'd never imagined possible. I should have fallen asleep immediately, exhausted from months of inadequate rest. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling and wondering if I'd just made the best decision of my life or signed away my freedom to a man whose world operated by rules I didn't understand. The rain had stopped outside, and the city glittered like a promise or a threat depending on how you looked at it. Somewhere in this enormous penthouse, a little boy was sleeping, probably dreaming of his mother and the violence he'd witnessed. And somewhere else in these expensive rooms, his father was likely awake too, carrying the weight of keeping his son safe in a world that had already taken so much from both of them. I'd gone from homeless to housed in a single evening, from invisible to essential in the time it took to share a can of soup. The transformation felt surreal, like something that would evaporate when morning came and revealed this was just a fever dream brought on by hunger and exhaustion. But the sheets were too real, the warmth too genuine, and the weight of the decision I'd made too heavy to be anything but solid and true. Whatever came next, whatever darkness existed in Vincent Castellanos' world, I'd chosen to walk into it with open eyes. Not because I was brave, but because a little boy with two old eyes had held my arm and called me his friend, and that somehow mattered more than safety or common sense, or any rational calculation of risk and reward. The morning would bring revelations and complications I couldn't predict. But for now, in this moment, I was warm and fed and no longer invisible. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. The city lights flickered outside my window like stars I could almost touch, and I finally let my eyes close, falling into sleep that felt like surrender and victory all at once. Whatever came next, I would face it the way I'd faced 3 months of survival on the streets, with stubborn determination and the kind of hope that refused to die, no matter how many times reality tried to kill it. Thomas had called me his friend, and Vincent had called me family. In a single day, I'd gone from having nothing to having something that felt dangerously close to purpose. The question now wasn't whether I could survive in this new world, but whether I could thrive in it without losing whatever part of me had been selfless enough to share my last meal with a scared child in the rain. Only, time would tell, but at least now I had time to find out.